I identify as a female, even though I was born a male.
So you believe humans can change their biological sex?
Yeah, I do.
Physicality and what you really biologically are, you cannot change. Like, it's this new culture of entitlement that the activism and the politicization of this topic from the left has created.
You said all women should be able to compete in women's sports. How do we define who is a woman and who is not?
I feel that I am a biological woman. I am biologically a female, even though I don't produce those gametes.
But you're not, though. Are Democrats doubling down on trans athlete insanity?
A high school track meet in California is drawing national attention after a transgender athlete delivered a dominant performance, sparking protest and reigniting the debate for fairness and safety in women's sports. A.B. Hernandez took first place in multiple jumping events, including winning the long jump by more than a foot ahead of the second place competitor, and the triple jump by nearly 3 feet. Some parents and activists argue that the competition is totally unfair, calling on Governor Newsom to intervene.
Well, concerned parents and young women athletes who don't actually enjoy having their sports dominated by biologically male, transgender-identifying competitors, they're going to have to keep on waiting for Gavin Newsom to take any step in their support. Because while the California governor has made some rhetorical gestures towards moderation, like when he was on Charlie Kirk's podcast talking about this issue, he's actually standing by California law that allows this insanity. In a statement, he said he, quote, rejects the right-wing's cynical attempt to weaponize this debate as an excuse to vilify individual kids. The governor's position is simple: stand with all kids and stand up to bullies. Of course, no one, including kids who identify as transgender, should be bullied or harassed. But while it's still statistically pretty rare, allowing biologically male athletes who identify as transgender to compete in women's sports jeopardizes women's fairness, opportunities, and even their safety in some cases. And that's not okay. Even if you, like me, completely support the right of adults who identify as transgender to live however will make them happiest, you still shouldn't die on this insane and unpopular hill. Doubling down on the 20 side of an 80-20 issue like this is only going to lead to more backlash against the trans community. And it's a political nightmare for Democrats, apparently including Gavin Newsom. But that's just my take. Joining me now on Brad vs. the World, we've got the right-wing transgender YouTube star Blaire White and the transgender activist and analyst Serena Munroe. Let's get into it. All right, guys, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, Serena, I'll start with you because you have a different perspective on this issue than I do, I imagine. So when we have Gavin Newsom saying, at the end of the day, he stands by these policies that allow people who are born biologically male and identify now as transgender, like A.B. Hernandez, the track athlete we just heard about, to compete in women's sports, it seems to me like something that's just kind of unfair at a base level, but also a very strange hill to die on for both the trans community and Democratic politicians. But what is your take on just broadly this issue with trans athletes in school sports?
Well, I mean, it's definitely an interesting topic. And for me, fairness is obviously the biggest question here. Is like, how can we, as trans people, compete fairly with biologically female or male individuals? For me, that's the crux of this conversation. Is how can we do this fairly? I'm for it. I think, if someone identifies as female or male and they have been training for these sports all their lives, then they should be able to compete as that gender in that sport. It all comes down, how can we do it fairly, equitably, and ensure, that we're allowing these individuals who have this training to compete fairly against that gender. Because if they were to, because we don't know long-term how these individuals will compete in their, quote, biological gender after they have transitioned. There's no good long-term studies done about these effects on how hormones affect the body as it transitions.
So why is it, though, that you think originally we separate sports between males and females biologically? Why do we do that?
Honestly, it's just a societal thing. For me, it's...
You don't think it's a biological reality that men are stronger and faster?
No, I think sports traditionally have been male-dominated, but I think once women started getting, more vocal and more like standing up for themselves and wanting an equal opportunity to compete, they were afforded a platform to compete within their own gender on the same platform with with similar rules.
But why?
Why?
Because of biology, right?
Yeah, biology. Because again, the standard norm, how I understand from society, is that women are naturally weaker than men. And, for a woman to compete against a male would be unfair, could cause undue harm to individuals of that gender or other people, and is,
But
quote,
why is that
safety.
different than when the male is someone who identifies as transgender?
Again, this goes back to the medical study where we don't know the long-term effects of how like estrogen and other hormones affect the body long term.
So do you
Now,
wait, so sorry, just to clarify,
right.
do you believe that there's some medical gatekeeping or threshold that a trans athlete should be forced to meet? Like you have to be on hormone therapy for X
Oh,
number
you
of
have to
years.
be on hormone therapy, and
Well,
if
that's not the policy everywhere, so that's an important distinction to make.
it is, but for me, if we're trying to do like an equitable type of atmosphere, you have to do kind of a balance of performance, if you will, similar to how they do in some sort of racing circles.
Okay, I want to bring in Blaire here.
Yeah.
Give us your thoughts and reaction.
Yeah, tap me in. So from my perspective, which I actually am fairly comfortable just saying is the truth, because there actually is a lot of studies and there is like, the history of mankind as well. Um, it's not because of society or social norms that men and women are separated in sports. It is purely because of biology. And that's why other sports are not segregated that don't involve necessarily physicality, why you can play like chess between genders and things like that. There are also long-term studies about the effects of hormones on adult bodies. Um, there's not as many studies as I would like. Trans is something that is very understudied because of how politicized it has been. However, we do know that certain things are permanent and certain things are not. Certain things reduce a little bit, but never to the point of actually creating an equal playing field. So like height is permanent from male puberty. Skeletal structure is permanent from male puberty. The cardiovascular architecture is permanent from male puberty. Things like muscle mass can decrease a little bit, but it's never to an equal playing field. So boys and girls, when they're growing up before puberty, there's like a rough evenness with the way that they can compete. And that's why there is, sports leagues when you're young that are not necessarily always segregated by gender. But by the time puberty hits, a 10 to 50% increase in the capabilities of the male students, minors, actually occurs. So for some people, it'll be that 10%, and some people, it'll be the 50%, but you can never, it is such an individual thing. And like I said, the reductions in things like muscle mass and other things is just not great enough to actually make it fair. So I think this is sort of a debate that is like, the jury's not out. The jury is very much in. The jury is here. The jury is like, yes, men and women are physically different. And so I don't know why some people, especially Democrat politicians, I mean, I can see why some trans activists are still trying to hang on to, an arm and a leg here and pretend like there's some sort of debate and like it's not over. But for these Democrat politicians, from what I can see, the main thing they need to do, one of the only things they need to do to actually win midterms and 28 is just come across as normal and just come to where most
That's a
people
struggle,
are
though.
on issues like this. And they seem dedicated to not. So I don't really know what's going on with that, but I just feel like the debate is kind of over.
I mean, it is politically at this point, it's an 80-20 issue. So we could talk about the politics of it, but I'm actually interested in kind of the underlying debate, because there's a portion of the trans community, or particularly trans LGBT kind of activists, that are pretty firmly wedded to this idea and do not want to compromise on it. But Serena, I guess I want to understand where we're coming from on a base level here. So I'm just going to kind of try to understand your concept of these different things. Do you acknowledge that a trans woman is a biological male?
Yes and no. Yes, in that they were born a male. My own personal belief is that when you transition, you're changing your body's chemistry to be female. I identify as a female, even though I was born a male.
So you believe humans can change their biological sex?
Yeah, I do.
What
Yeah.
is okay,
Well,
Blaire.
I guess the issue with that is, if I could just jump in, is that when it comes to things like personal beliefs, those are separate from, a debate about the facts, right? Like, you could have the personal belief, and certainly if you want to invoke some sort of like metaphysical aspect or something, then maybe we have like a conversation going. But when it comes to physicality and what you really biologically are, you cannot change. You can feminize certain aspects, like no one's
Mhm.
debating that, which is why you can acknowledge that even with trans athletes who are on hormones, there is somewhat of a changing of certain features. But I mean, it just is what it is. The definition of a trans woman is a biological male who then transitions. But that doesn't change anything about your biology. And if I could just ask a question, because I feel like I never get an answer. I've had so many debates with trans activists, like, what is it that, just to get your perspective, what is it that you guys are clinging on to so hard? Like, why is it difficult to acknowledge the biological state of your body? Because for me personally, I don't have any grievance with that, and I've never really understood people who cling to it.
Honestly, it just comes down to, like, the dissonance that I feel within myself, through my own journey, coming out as trans and understanding this, from my own standpoint is I just have a hard time accepting that my biology is male, and yes, that is physically true, and yes, medically, and I cannot change that, but, I do believe that the metaphysical aspect of this is that I am female,
But your biological sex is male. Would you
my biological
acknowledge
sex is
that?
male, yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
Well,
I
well,
that's
do
that
the
kind of
recognize that.
thing.
feels. Oh, sure. Go ahead, Blaire.
That's the thing. So you see that, or you feel that the metaphysical version of yourself or your higher self or your soul is female. And like, honestly, everyone has their own spiritual beliefs. Like, no one
Mhm.
can take that away from you. But I guess when you try to impose that on now, like, I would imagine you're the kind of person that, I don't know if you're Christian or Muslim, if you adhere to any actual religion, but you probably would not want those religions imposing like laws based on those metaphysical beliefs that they have on you. So like, I would hope and assume you wouldn't want something like Sharia law, and that's an example of them taking their spiritual beliefs, imposing it on your physical reality. And so I see it as the same. Maybe you have a spiritual belief that you are a woman in a different, realm, and that's, I'm not taking that away from you. But you can't then say that we can compete in women's sports then, because there still is this biological state of being that we're actually all contending with and living in. You know what
Yeah,
I
let me
mean?
let me
Yeah.
direct this as in the form of a question to Serena. I mean, I will always support your right to live your life, call yourself what you will, live your life how you please, do whatever you want with your body, hormones. I will always support that as an adult. But at the end of the day, if we agree on the premise that biological sex cannot literally be changed and is based on your genetics and the structure of your reproductive system, in changing your exterior or taking hormones doesn't literally change your sex, what is so wrong with simply saying that for sports, we have male and female and it's about biology, not identity? What is the problem with that, Serena?
It's hard to separate those 2 aspects for a lot of people, and for me, I find that very difficult. Like, accepting yourself and then accepting what you go by every day, and then having to come back and compete in an area with people you don't identify with, it takes a mental strain on you, and it hurts mentally, and it'll probably hurt you physically. So separating a trans woman from what the sport she has trained and loved to do is going to hurt them and s hurt their ability to perform.
But you understand that when we're talking about policy and, fairness for everybody, not just for trans people, that you do have to separate the emotion out of that, right? Like, that's
Oh,
not a sound argument that it would hurt your feelings or cause distress.
that's part of the aspect that we have to remember about this. Like, we can set rules in place to
But even if we
safeguard.
keep that in mind, like, I can completely hold in one hand that it's something that is going to emotionally upset the trans athletes, but also say that logically that doesn't trump the actual policies that need to be in place.
Well, what about so why are we preferencing the feelings of a select few trans athletes over
Right.
the feelings and safety and comfort of the masses of biological female
I mean,
athletes, Serena?
if anyone is like, okay, let's take that into respect, because I believe there was a case where there was in San Francisco just the other day where there was an issue of a trans woman in changing in the women's room there, and they had to address that. It's a tough policy, and this is where I'm, again, in a policy world, it's not going to be perfect from my perspective. Um, but if we're worried about fairness, I mean, again, there are ways we can measure balance of performance to ensure that if there is a biological advantage or disadvantage, we can take care of that. Like, if we're going to take,
I'm not sure that you really can, because when you
yeah,
look at studies of athletes that go transgender athletes that go through hormone therapy, I mean, there still is a difference after that. But even if you could actually, Serena, I think the question is a little more fundamental than that. It's like the sports aren't for them, right? The spots, the medals, the positions are not for any kind of person that's born biologically male, transgender or not. They're for biological females. So even if you could eliminate any advantage, I mean, why should they be entitled to compete in a sports division that's not for them? Because sports is inherently competitive. So you're taking a spot potentially from someone else. You're taking an award from someone else. You're taking something from someone else. Everything is a give or take, especially at
mhm.
higher levels.
Yeah, and that's just sports in general. I mean, if you're going to compete in sports, you have to. If you're not first, you're last. You're training, you're competing, you're going for that number one spot, no matter what. Um, I used to race go karts as a child, and I would always train to be number one. So I understand that aspect, but understanding where this discussion came from, we're fundamentally talking about two people that tied for fifth place in a NCAA swim meet.
That's not, I mean, that's just one example.
That's just one example. Yeah, it's the
You're
most
talking about Riley Gaines.
I'm talking about Riley Gaines. Yeah,
But
it's the
even
most.
then, that's actually a more powerful example than you think, because she was literally not on the podium,
No
right?
one. Yeah, no, they both of them weren't. And if it was a first place finish and they both tied,
I
more
just,
power to both of them.
but actually, the bigger issue that Riley Gaines has talked about is that they were forced to change in the same locker room as Leah Thomas, and
Right.
they
So
were
it's
exposed to
different.
male genitalia.
Right. It's more implications than just like the sport itself too. It's things like that. And I just don't understand why there's so many trans activists, and I am including you in this, who are clinging on to something that, first of all, you and I both know that trans is not something that started existing in 2016 once everyone wanted to start doing sports in the trans community. So
Mhm.
why there wasn't this issue before, I've never really seen any trans activists try to unpack. Why were there not trans activists disrupting sports before? Why were there not issues like this coming up with trans women in women's locker rooms before? Like, it's this new culture of entitlement that the activism and the politicization of this topic from the left has created that allows people to think that they can go into a space like a women's locker room. And I just feel like if you want to be a woman, you should have empathy for women. Like, for me, that's one of the first, like, parts that, like, but that's one of the most beautiful things about womanhood and being a woman is the fact that they have more emotional intelligence and empathy for other human beings. And what I see is a lot of trans women who don't feel the need to give that back or to see that as a two-way street.
No, I agree with you there, Blair. Like, I see that all the time, and I try to course correct people I see that don't have empathy for other women or understand that we can't always get what we want. And
And that's life for everybody, right?
yeah,
That's that's
yeah,
that's
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 life. That's life for everyone.
So
And
then do you think that trans women should be banned from women's sports then? Because there does have to be a decision at the end of the day. It's either we're going to allow it or we're not.
I honestly, I don't know.
But
This
Okay,
is
I
the
mean, you're saying you agree with these things, but then at the end of the day, you support it. So then
I do.
why? For the sake of what then? Because if you agree that the biological advantage exists, then what is the argument for keeping it in place? Just the feelings of the trans activist or the trans athlete?
No, it's just how they identify. It's just how they are and how they want to live their life.
But
If
Why is that more important?
there's a social, I'm sorry, there's a social contract for everybody in this world. You can live your life how you want, but when it impedes on other people, that's where people have to draw the line. And that's for anything. That's not just trans. That's literally anything. If there was a 300-pound, woman who wanted to go compete on a team of like 13-year-old girls, there would be a line drawn. And just because the 300-pound woman wants to live her life that way doesn't mean that she should be allowed to. So why is it different rules and a different standard for trans people? Like, what is the universal principle here? Does everyone just get to do whatever they want because of their feelings, or does there have to be boundaries? Like, do you have a concept of like a universal principle for this? Something that applies to everybody, not
Yeah,
just trans people.
let's let Serena
Sorry.
answer.
yeah, so I would say no, I mean, yeah, there is a how would I want to explain this? I mean, yeah, I do believe that women should compete all women should be able to compete in sports that they wish they compete in. And yes, I do believe that there is some advantage, but I also believe that there is a way to better understand those advantages and still try to have a even playing field. That's where I'm coming
So
from.
I guess we have to get more fundamental here.
Yeah.
What is a woman?
Well, if we go by Blaire's examples, you were born a female. You were born with those chromosomes that makes you a female. However, with that, there are also chromosomal disorders that
Right, but we're not
also
talking
That's
about
different.
intersex. That's
Yeah.
separate. Those are
That's
rare
different.
conditions. What is
But
a woman? Like, we need a working definition. You
yeah,
said all women should be able to compete in women's
yeah,
sports. How do we define who is a woman and who is not?
that yeah. For for me, my definition is that it's how you identify.
That's not a definition,
Listen, I
though. You
We
know.
need the
understand that that's not a
definition, not
definition.
yours. If we all live in this world where we all have our own separate definitions for everything, like that's called civilizational collapse. Like we can't even go on with everyone just making up their own definitions for everything,
So,
especially for
Serena,
something so
where I'm
fundamental.
coming from, like, so by your definition, right now, if I were to switch in my head and start identifying as a woman, then therefore I am one.
You're a little tall for that, Brad.
Looking at my notes, to me, how I define it. A woman is someone whose internal self's lived experience or place aligns with womanhood.
What does
Whether
that mean?
it's my lived in experience that how I identify and how I go about my life.
Such as, like, get more specific.
I dress as a woman, I identify as a woman, I present myself as a woman, I use she, her pronouns, I live my life as if I were a naturally born woman.
Okay, Blaire, I'm not really hearing a
Definition,
definition
yeah.
there.
Well, I heard Serena's definition, but the thing about, these concepts and words is that they have their own static definitions and meanings that no matter how we feel about them, like I can't just say like I think the color black actually looks something like it's yellow or something. Like that's not how it works. Like and you're free to have your own perspectives on your own life and experiences, but when we're having a debate and a talk about how things should run in the real world, don't you think that that would be like a bad idea to just have it go off of your own personal perspective?
I mean, that's how I operate. That's how I operate. And from my point and my discussion and how I frame it
But
is
don't you think that's also kind of like an extreme narcissism that you just acknowledge that you think the world should run off of your
no,
perspective?
the world should not run off my the world should run off the perspective as the whole of the societal whole. From my
Okay, so
under
then we
for
shouldn't have trans women in women's sports.
if that's what we're running with, then yeah. I think they should for my own personal definitions, but if we're going to go off the biological definition of a woman born as a natural born female, identified with those chromosomes and all those features, then yes. Then you're going to have the trans women, trans men compete in their own biological sports areas
I guess
as they were born.
I want to play you guys a clip, and then we can discuss the question of what's so wrong about that exactly. Because Tom Steyer, who is a prominent Democrat running for governor in California, was asked about this, and here's what he had to say. Let's listen.
You talked about trans people. I'm totally in favor of trans athletes in high school. I think when you understand the vulnerability, the stress, the danger of being a trans kid, and you understand that almost half of them try to commit suicide.
Yeah.
And then you think we're going to punish those kids. We're going to cut them off from team sports. We're going to cut them off from participating in the community. We're going to cut them off from fun. It's like, no, we're not. No, we're not. And, as someone who played sports my whole life and loved sports and loved playing sports, there are more important things than whether you start on your high school basketball team. And that is standing up for people who are under threat of death.
So there's a lot to unpack there. To me, it seems like he is very much downplaying the concerns of women and girls who have, scholarships on the line. And actually, it means a lot to young women. It meant a lot to me as a young man competing in sports. It's not just, get over it. You're not going to start anymore. Too bad. So sad. And then obviously, that's not a real statistic that he cited. It's not true that 50% of trans youth attempt to kill themselves. That's a completely false statistic. And even the underlying statistics he's misquoting are not even accurate. But regardless, I mean, this is where we get into the emotional blackmail territory of this issue. Obviously, I don't want any trans young person or young person who identifies as trans to ever harm themselves. But it's like, to me, Serena, this feels like emotional blackmail. Like you have to let something happen that's manifestly unfair to others, or this person may harm themselves. One, there's like no evidence that allowing trans athletes to compete in sports reduces suicide or anything like that. That's not a thing. But even if there was, it's like, could I tell you, like, let me play in Little League or I'm going to kill myself? Is that not? And then if you don't let me play in Little League,
that's very extreme. I mean, that's a very extreme example. And this is where I have a problem with the Democrats' message and what they're trying to accomplish. Because, you're right. Trans kids aren't magically going to stop hurting themselves or harming themselves because they get to be able to play the sport they want to play. There's larger, deeper issues there that need to be addressed. And I mean, honestly, I agree. It does feel like emotional blackmail, and it just makes me uncomfortable and, you can call me a hypocrite for this, and see, kind of like my two sides here is that I don't like it when people play the emotions in a political state like that. You're drawing on the emotional heartstrings to make those people attached to you, to come to you and have you think that they understand your plight, your drama, and that they can magically solve your problems. When honestly, I don't feel that any of them have ever had my back or will have my back.
Okay, Blaire, your thoughts.
I'm glad you realize that, because Democrat politicians don't give a crap about any minority they purport to care about. So that's good, especially trans people. And the fact that he can so flippantly, refer to like half of, this demographic, minor version of demographic, killing themselves is so gross. But do you see any parallel between the way he was making arguments there and the way you did earlier in this video?
I mean, honestly, yeah, I do see it, and I do understand that now. Like, I do see, like, I was pulling from that, and it's not a great policy measure, and, running off feelings is not how you make policy. It's how equitable and how you can still have that fairness, but still.
Serena, I'm kind of glad you're agreeing with us, but you were just yesterday literally retweeting praise of Tom Steyer for this statement.
I mean, at the time I retweeted it. It's one of those, well, it's nice that you finally see it But at the same time, like, thinking about it and, reflecting on it and seeing it and understanding it more and just like coming back to reality, it's like, well, it's one of those things that long term, okay, you say this, but what will you do long term for trans people and athletes and trans athletes?
Well, you are also retweeting posts that were mocking J.K. Rowling for the idea of defining a woman by biological female traits. But we've kind of, I mean, do you stand by that?
Yeah, that I stand by. Like, again, this is my duality here. Um, I do not like anything like, yeah, I do not like what J.K. Rowling has to say, honestly.
Okay, well,
And
let me pull up that post that J.K. Rowling actually said. Being biologically female means having a body that is observably organized to produce large gametes, eggs, as opposed to a body organized to produce small gametes, sperm. A woman is female whether or not her eggs have been fertilized or not. A man can never be female. And that was in response to a post that said, your daily reminder that trans women are biological women. The term biological woman is made up by anti-science folk who want to other trans women. If you think that being female is strictly about the ability to get pregnant, you will invalidate cis women as well as many who aren't able to do so. So that was the original post that JK had responded to. Then you called her clinically stupid for that statement. What do you think? You stand by the idea that it's clinically stupid to define female by reproductive orientation and
I mean,
biology?
I don't deny biological sex exists or that reproductive biology is real. Humans are, that's just how human biology is. It's legitimate biological framework. I mean, where I disagree is that the idea that gametes alone settle that debate itself.
Well, I don't think J.K. Rowling thinks it's only that. And I think from what it sounds like earlier, you were saying that you don't deny biological sex exists, but you think you can actually change it.
I do. I mean, I think that again, this is what I think and how I believe it is that, yeah, you can, through the hormones and through, medical transitioning, that I feel that I am a biological woman. I am biologically a female, even though I don't produce those
But you're
gametes.
not, though. You acknowledge you were born biologically male,
I
like
was born biologically male, yeah.
and your genetics are male.
I believe that's not my case.
You believe that you're not genetically male because
No,
of taking hormones.
sorry. I believe I was born genetically male.
But are you
Yes.
and you acknowledge you are still genetically male?
Reluctantly, yes, but I believe that I am
See,
through
this is the issue. This feels way more like an emotional
I'm sorry, I'm
problem.
confused.
This seems more like an emotional problem, and I'm not trying to be mean because
No, and I'm
you
trying
seem
to.
like a nice enough person. You really do. And so there's some debates where I could come on here and really like kind of be mean. I don't want to do that here. I feel like this stems from something maybe a little bit deeper just with you. I'm not a therapist, but if I could kind of LARP as one for just a second, I think you have maybe an issue with integrating aspects of yourself and looking at yourself as a whole person. For me, I don't have an issue integrating the fact that I'm male into my view of myself and who I am as a person. My childhood, where I come from, and what I still am is a part of my journey, just like all of it is, and what's to come is a part of my journey. And I feel like when you sort of deny parts of who you are, whether it's your biological sex, whether it's things you may have done in your past, whether it's whatever, you can't deny reality because you end up living in a way that doesn't make sense. I mean, you yourself acknowledge that you have a cognitive dissonance on this issue. And if we have a cognitive dissonance, it means we're not seeing things clearly, which definitely means we can't go and argue for things clearly and coherently. It definitely means we can't go out there and suggest policy positions if you yourself admit you have a cognitive dissonance on how you see this issue. Does that make sense?
No, it does. I thank you. I appreciate that. Appreciate the feedback.
So I guess the final kind of subtopic on this issue before, and maybe we won't solve all the big picture debates today, but is that it just feels to me as somebody who does, respect and support autonomy and freedom for trans individuals, particularly adults, that is very much not the motion or direction that things are going in at the moment, right? There's this very widespread backlash to trans people, activism, whatever you want, however you want to identify it or describe it. And to the extent that that backlash is kind of affecting just, adult trans people who want to live their lives, I don't support that or like that. But it does seem to me and it's somewhat inevitable that when you cling to the 20 side of the 80-20 issues, like the trans sports issue, that you're going to have that kind of backlash. So why is it that all the groups and even activists and even folks like yourself, Serena, can't just like give that ground up?
Fear of erasure, I would say, from how I view it. Like, I don't fear of being erased and not being able to do what you like and exist. I mean, it's one of those things where you spend your entire life in fear of what you are and who you are. And when you finally be able to accept it and, live your life and do what you like, it's one of those things that you wanna cling to every aspect of it. And it's
But
I mean, for me, it's difficult, and as Blaire pointed out, for me, there is a I do have a lot of dissonance with it, and some people can do it better than others.
I just have to point out, and this is to be constructive.
Mhm.
You said that you lived your life in fear, and what was the other word you used in regards to how you saw yourself? Fear and denial of yourself?
Fear and denial.
Okay, and then you said, "But then you accept it and do what you wanna do." I don't feel like from this conversation and things that you've said that have been very illuminating about who you are and how you feel, I don't think you did cross that threshold of accepting yourself because you still say that you have such a hard time
I st
acknowledging something as basic as your biological sex.
I
That doesn't
still have
sound
a
like
hard
an
time.
acceptance to me. That sounds like a refusal to integrate that part of yourself.
It's one of those things that I'm still working on. I'm gonna continue to work on to be able to accept that.
I guess
And that's honest.
that's
I
fair.
can
That's
appreciate
fair. But
that.
I guess what I
Yeah.
would suggest is that I actually understand your fear of not being able to live your life and not being able to, if presenting yourself in many ways as a woman is what will make you happiest in life. I support that for you. And obviously, we have this backlash of like people some who would genuinely try to make that illegal or institutionalize you or something like that. And I don't support that, obviously. But I do think that the clinging to the most radical positions on this debate is the most likely thing that will lead to erasure,
Mhm.
right? Like will lead to public backlash. Because if you tell people that the two options are totally rejecting trans people or accepting biological males in women's sports, biologically male sex offenders in women's prisons, they're going to pick the totally rejecting trans people. Most people are.
Trans
And
kids.
correct. We live in a democratic society where we do have some degree of majority rules. So it's like if your alternative was let trans people live, accommodate the trans community in certain ways, and we will respect your boundaries and acknowledge biological reality in the instances where it is important. I mean, that I think could be a winning message. I don't think this can be a winning message, Serena.
You know, you're probably right, and I'm probably wrong. I mean, this is one of those things where we're holding on to something so hard, so ardently that it's gonna hurt more in the long run than in the short run.
Okay.
Well, then do you think you could see yourself going forward being a proponent in the opposite direction and actually telling other trans people and other trans activists, hey, we got this wrong. Trans women should not be in women's sports. Kids should not be transitioning. I guess we haven't even talked about that.
No. If the message is important, how we deliver that message would be important, and making sure that we ensure their psychological safety with that, saying, "Hey, sorry, this is how it has to be. We're not we're doing this to protect the sport itself, but this is just one aspect of everything else. You still have everything for you." I mean, again, it's all all about the messaging.
Well,
But it's also not.
that's an interest. I mean, there's propaganda and there's messaging and there's the way that you say things, but I find that people on the left are always so much more focused on that, and they're focused on the way that you say things rather than like, okay, so you're sitting here saying you're kind of understanding you were wrong maybe on the trans athlete thing. So would that actually lead you to switch your position publicly and advocate against trans women being involved in women's sports, or at least leaving the debate altogether and stop, pushing for them to be in the sports? Because it really is those two kind of options. You either support it or you don't.
Yeah, I would support it. I would support saying trans women should be in the biological side of the sport. They should be in
Wait, in
What do
women
you
or
mean?
men's?
men's
Okay.
side. Yeah.
Well, hallelujah. There's a point. Now, I got to be honest, Serena. I fear you may exit this conversation and get back into the blue sky Twitter kind of trans rights activist echo chamber and maybe go back to your former position.
Here's the thing with my positions, and I'll make this abundantly clear. They do change, but if it makes sense from a holistic standpoint for the society as a whole, then that's where I land and that's where I'll stay. And I'll gladly take the hate that I'm going to get for flipping on this issue from my community and my fellow trans men and women.
I think
It's
this is the first debate I've ever done where the person actually changed their mind oh
well,
my God, that's
well,
crazy.
well.
We
Here's
haven't
the
talked about trans kids though. I don't know how we feel about that, but
okay. I mean,
this is Brad's show. I'm not going to steer.
yeah,
I'm just saying
yeah,
we might not
Brad,
have
this
gone
is your
everything.
show. How
if
do you want to do this?
I mean, is that something you stand on, Serena? That
Stand on.
like you are a hardcore believer that kids should transition, or no?
Oh God, no. I think kids need to be kids.
Okay.
Ki-
All right.
Here,
Well,
kids are always going to have a lot of questions, a lot of issues, and this is my stance on it, 100%.
well, welcome to the Blaire White Army, Serena Munroe.
Wow.
Wait, you made a face.
You sound like me. What's going on?
I think kids should just. As a kid going through like my own dysphorias and issues, I wanted a therapist. In fact, I did a post on Twitter about this earlier. I wanted a therapist to talk about it. I didn't want to transition. I didn't know what it was. If kids have these issues and parents, I understand it's scary. It's a lot of unknowns, especially if you don't have any understanding of the trans community. Find a specialist to talk to and have a better understanding and have your kid.
I'm not sure I trust those specialists, but all of that could be a conversation
That's
for
a
another
whole
day.
that's a whole other thing.
Yes.
But
Well,
yeah.
I appreciate you guys coming together, having a conversation. I think we need more of that, including on these contentious and fraught issues. Thank you both so much for making the time and coming on the show.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having me.